From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm health equity reporter Drew Hawkins, chopping it up this week. On today's show, we'll take a look at the costs behind evacuation.
Evacuating is sort of a luxury.
And the growing movement to end forced labor in prisons.
People are stripped of their dignity, of their ability to control what happens to their bodies. They're put in grave danger every day.
That's all coming up on the Gulf States Gumbo. So this is our first episode, and you might be asking yourself, what is the Gulf States Gumbo? Well, everyone has their own recipe, and our gumbo is full of locally sourced ingredients.
I have some zucchini there and then squash on the other side.
Okay, so not those types of ingredients. This isn't a cooking show, just to be clear. I'm talking about stories, about things like high utility bills.
Total account balance, $19,526.57.
Breaking down the news and elevating the voices of real people.
Like the famous saying is, put it where the goats can get it.
Each week, we'll be serving you a mix of stories cooked up by our team of reporters working across the region.
From the Mississippi border to Birmingham, Alabama.
The center of Lexington, Mississippi.
The Grable landing site on the Tallahatchie River. Marks, Mississippi. Up in the Mississippi Delta.
The sanctuary of Becoming Church in Decatur, Alabama.
We cover things like environmental justice, health equity, criminal justice, and sports and culture. To start things off this week, we've got a story about what is an inescapable reality for people living in this part of the country: hurricanes. And just speaking personally, I grew up in New Orleans, and names like Katrina and Ida still trigger memories of disaster. And nearly every year, at some point, my family faces a tough decision on whether or not to evacuate for a storm. And this year, intense hurricanes have impacted millions of Americans, many forced to evacuate, and many are still recovering. And that decision to stay or go can get trickier, especially since evacuating has gotten more expensive. To find out more, our economic mobility reporter, Stephen Basaha, stuck with one family from New Orleans who made the choice to leave and keep track of the costs.
Hurricane Francine was forecast to go straight through New Orleans last month, and residents were left with that way too common question: stay or go? Nick Oquin picked go.
It is raining, and it's been raining since I left my house.
Francine made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane. There wasn't any evacuation order for the city, but Oquin has a newborn baby and decided it was not a good idea to stick it out. He called after breaking out of the evacuation traffic jam with his kids smiling in the back seat.
They weren't smiles about 30 minutes ago. Yeah. Nobody likes the traffic, even the kids,
Besides being a dad to two young boys, Oquin's also an accountant, and he agreed to keep track of his evacuation costs. First item on the list was grapes to pacify those road-raging backseat drivers.
So far, the grapes at $3.99 a pound were pretty much a budget killer so far.
Oquin guessed the trip would cost him somewhere between $500 and $2,000. Paula Mazumder is an economist with Florida International University, and he says that budget makes sense.
It has a wide range of the expenses. When you ask for expenses, it's a huge range.
Beyond the snacks, evacuees need full meals, a place to sleep, gas. Someone in the family could need specific medical care, and all that costs more the longer the evacuation goes. And Mazumder says evacuations overall are just getting way more expensive. He says in recent years, costs have gone well past $1,500. Some of that's inflation, and some of that's because recent hurricanes have been accelerating fast.
For example, think about this Hurricane Milton. In less than 24 hours, it jumped from Category 1 to 5.
These fast-growing storms can catch people off guard, leading to late evacuations, jammed-up roads, and packed hotels. And of course, price gouging.
We have some anti-price gouging law in Florida, but in reality, you see those things causing your evacuation expenses go up.
FEMA can cover some evacuation costs, but it depends on the storm. And Mazumder says it's not always clear. And since those expenses are one of the primary reasons people choose to stay or leave, he worries the rising costs will lead to fewer evacuations. It's why he thinks there should be state or federal programs that help with those expenses for people with low income.
And also it shows government is actually is there when you need their help most.
When it comes to Hurricane Francine, the Louisiana Bayou got the brunt of the storm, and some residents there went without power for 5 days. But most people in New Orleans got power back much faster. Nick Oquin ended up returning to his home after just 2 days away.
Hey, Stephen, we're back home on the couch.
The final total for his 48-hour evacuation, $505.
Not counting the school supplies that we bought while we were there.
Yeah, we could leave those out. You probably need to get those anyway.
Yes.
Minus those school supplies, his expenses included a bit less than $300 for the hotel, $170 for food, and $50 for gas. By evacuation standards, pretty cheap. Now, Oquin was lucky. The storm was weaker than Helene and Milton, so he got back home quickly. Plus, he was on paternity leave, so he didn't have to miss time from work, which can be another evacuation cost. And he acknowledges he's in a place where $500 isn't much of a dent in his overall budget.
Evacuating is sort of a luxury.
But with hurricane seasons continuing to intensify, that luxury may become more often a necessity, whether or not people can afford it. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Stephen Basaha.
The Gulf States Newsroom is a team of journalists working with NPR and local public media stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana to cover the issues that matter to you. Email us, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org.
There's a push to end forced labor in prisons in the South. Lawyers for prisoners say they're made to do low-paid work that's often dangerous. And prison officials say they have safety rules in place and aren't violating legal standards. Our criminal justice reporter, Kat Strongquist, takes a closer look at the movement, including a lawsuit in Louisiana.
Samantha Kennedy sits at a long table in a light-filled conference room. But we're talking about the sloping fields around the prison best known as Angola. In those fields, people in prison are working in blistering Louisiana summers.
One could just imagine having an armed guard standing over them while for hours a day that they have to pick grass with their fingers.
Kennedy is bringing us to Angola's farm line. Her group, the Promise of Justice Initiative, reps incarcerated people in a big federal lawsuit about it. Lawyers say people don't have a choice about working the farm line, that it puts people with disabilities in danger. And if they say no,
they lose access to their family. They don't get to earn the 2 cents an hour that they need in order to be able to pay for medical visits or to pay for toilet paper.
Plaintiffs say the work lingers. In filings, one person who worked the farm line wrote, he has nightmares where he's shot for refusing to pick vegetables. The lawsuit is part of legal challenges to prison labor percolating in the Gulf South and in other states like Colorado. Kennedy says for those working in Angola and other prisons,
people are stripped of their dignity, of their ability to control what happens to their bodies. They are put in grave danger every day.
These legal fights are happening in Louisiana and also Alabama, where 2 high-profile suits are winding through federal and state courts.
The question that these prisoners are raising is this not slavery? They're bound to the system. They're coerced to labor.
That's Robert Chase, a historian from Stony Brook University in New York.
They're not given an alternative, and in many cases, they're given either very nominal pay or no pay at all.
He says this all goes back to the Reconstruction era, after the Civil War, when prisons sold incarcerated labor to private companies, and a part of the 13th Amendment that says people can be forced to work if they're convicted of crimes.
What prisons have done is they have replaced the coerced system of enslavement with a new brand of coercion.
Chase says then and now, people of color are most affected, and that prison organizers are deeply aware of the historical context. He talks to people in Alabama's prisons and has paid close attention to strikes and lawsuits.
They're in really a tight spot, but I think that these lawsuits might actually gain the kind of traction that they need.
Alabama and Louisiana officials are litigating the cases, making legal arguments, and asking judges to throw out claims. Neither state's prison system gave us a statement when we asked. People like Bill Kissinger are watching closely, too. He's a writer and advocate who served more than 40 years at Angola.
I picked corn, okra, potatoes, tomatoes, hot sauce peppers.
Working mostly in offices, but also in factories and fields.
I worked at Crusher House where they manufactured horse feed, burned fields and cleared them, cut and pulled Johnson grass.
But he's not really optimistic about Louisiana's legal challenge. He says the state's politics are difficult and thinks there's less brutality at Angola than decades ago.
I get it that you're hot. I get it that you're uncomfortable. I get it that you'd rather be doing something else. But I just don't see a high probability of success.
But Kissinger is white. Many involved in the lawsuit are black. They write that what happens on the farm line makes them think of slavery. A trial is set this year. Kennedy, from the group working on the lawsuit, says incarcerated people could face consequences for bringing this to light.
People participating in this lawsuit with us, the plaintiffs, are doing it at potentially great peril. They are brave.
She says people in prison want to be productive, but they want to choose their work, make contributions, and be safe. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Kat Stromquist.
Now it's time for a little joy, a segment we're calling Gulf States Gems, where we're shining a light on some of the treasures of the region, from quirky bookstores and shops to grand natural wonders. This week's gem is brought to us by environmental justice reporter Danny MacArthur.
My Gulf States gem is Harold and Lillian's down in Clermont Harbor. It was one of my stops on a reporting trip with health equity reporter Drew Hawkins for Place Erased, a series about communities in our region that have been transformed by major environmental shifts. This bar is the epitome of cheers. You can go in bright and early, and you'll already see regulars. They call themselves the Breakfast Club. It's been around for nearly 80 years, and it survived hurricane after hurricane. In fact, one local put it this way: the first places that are open are the bars and the churches. Harold and Lillian's is one of those places that will always be around because it's become an essential part of the community.
You can see pictures of this and other Gulf States gems on our Instagram at Gulf States Newsroom, and be sure to give us a follow while you're there. And if there's something that you think is a gem, we'd love to hear about it. Maybe there's a unique dish or a landmark that you think is really special in our region. Send us an email, connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org, and tell us why you think it's a Gulf States gem. This episode of the Gulf States Gumbo was produced by me, Drew Hawkins, and edited by our head chef, Priska Neely. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. You can also shoot us a text at 205-537-9580. That's 205-537-9580. I'm health equity reporter Drew Hawkins. Thanks for listening. Oh, and don't forget to stir your roux.